All right, everybody, I just wanted to take a moment to record a quick educational video for those of you who are interested in learning more about heart rate training, zone training, anaerobic threshold, and energy systems, which really should be all of you because you all have bodies and we want to take care of them. So let's start off with this first sheet right here, zone training frequently asked questions. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to be trying to figure out what our anaerobic threshold is. And we're going to get to that number here on the next sheet. But grab your calculators to start with, and we are going to start on this first tab right here in this first box. We're going to subtract your age from 180. You're going to subtract an additional 10 if you have not been exercising. Subtract 0 if you have been exercising 2 to 3 times per week for a year. And then add 10 if you have not been exercising 4 times a week for the past few years. Use your best judgment with this, and whatever number that you get is going to be your estimated anaerobic threshold. Now, to know your true anaerobic threshold, you would need to go somewhere and do something like a VO2 max test. I recommend DexaBody if you're living in Utah. DexaBody does an awesome VO2 test. They also do your basal metabolic or resting metabolic rate, as well as a amazing comprehensive body composition analysis. They've also started to add some new things into their services like gene testing. But the first three I mentioned, the VO2 testing, the resting metabolism test, and their body composition test are awesome, and I highly recommend them. Anyway, circling back to our anaerobic threshold, once you've done the math on this first column and you get that number, then you're going to go over here to our next sheet. All right, so we're here on the second sheet. Now, this one is where we would plug in that anaerobic threshold estimated number. So let's say you got 151 was the number you got with your math. You're going to find on this blue line in the middle which number is closest to that. So if you got 151, you would select 150 as your estimated anaerobic threshold. Now, again, if you go to somewhere like DexaBody and you get your actual anaerobic threshold, then your information will be a little bit more exact and comprehensive. But this is a great low budget way to kind of estimate that number. So what this means is this is our column. So everything vertically in the column above and below 150 would be your target heart rate zones. So if we look all the way down at the bottom of the 150 column, we'll see 90 to 105. That is an estimation of what your heart rate would be in a zone 1. We're going to explain what those zones are again in a little bit. Then if you look up a little bit, your estimation for zone 2 would be anywhere between a heart rate between 105 and 135. Same thing for a zone 3, and it would be an estimation of your heart rate being between 135 to 150. Now, the significance of the 150 is significant. The anaerobic threshold is the point where your body switches from burning primarily fat as your energy source to stored carbs, sugars. It's basically your muscle glycogen and blood glucose. So above 150 would be your anaerobic. Below your threshold is aerobic. Above the threshold is anaerobic. So zone 4 would be anywhere between maybe 150 to 165, and your peak would be 165 and above. Now, I do want to say that the bottom ranges on these, those are those are estimations of ranges that are kind of like the bottom of your zone 1, but zone 1 really goes all the way down to your resting heart rate. So it doesn't really have a bottom minimum, but these would be kind of like bottom minimums for activity, if that makes any sense. And then if we circle back to this first sheet, now that makes sense. So we have our estimated anaerobic threshold and we know what our zones are. Again, if you want to know your true anaerobic threshold, I recommend going to DexaBody if you're in Utah. I think DexaBody also has some locations in California. You might just want to Google that, DexaBody. If you are in a different state or a different country, because I do train people all over the world, you'll want to Google VO2 testing centers near me or resting metabolism testing centers near me. They can get that information for you. A lot of gyms will even offer this test as well. Last note on this is that if you are in one of my groups, then your zone training will be based on our current knowledge of best practices. So I am a big proponent of continuing education. So I'm always researching what is the best, most sound, up-to-date information for you. So these are going to be general training techniques that are going to help improve your cardiovascular health. If you are one of my one-on-one clients and we're working on building your habits, we are going to be creating some custom goals for you to improve your exact targets based on what we're working on. If you are one of my athletes, then we are going to be focusing on performance optimization. My athletes are training to compete and training to win. If you are an athlete who is not trying to train to compete or win and you're just training to train, then one of my groups or the client system would be a better spot for you. Okay, so now we are going to be talking about the difference between aerobic versus anaerobic training. So like I said earlier, aerobic is your like low zones, zone 1 through 3. It's like, it's your cardiovascular training. And anaerobic is your high intensity training that is going to be using primarily stored sugars as your energy source. Here's a little fun fact, is the Latin root word for aerobic actually means with oxygen, because your body is using oxygen to convert fat into a usable fuel source. That's what's happening in our aerobic system. So you've probably heard it called your fat burning zone. I'm in my fat burning zone right now. I am burning fat, not so much sugar. And when you are burning primarily fat, it's a lower effort. So the lower your heart rate is, the more aerobic you are. Now, ultimately, our goal is going to be to get our anaerobic threshold to be really high. We want it to be really hard for your heart to hit that threshold, because optimally, you could be doing really challenging things like hiking, sports, etc., and still be in a lower zone. And that is truly what is behind energy system training and optimization, is we want to be able to keep your resting heart rate as low as we can and increase your anaerobic threshold. So highly trained athletes have a very, very, very big zone 1 to 3. That is what we're shooting for. But keep in mind, when you're in zone 1 to 3, you're burning the least amount of calories, which is why I say this is great for cardiovascular health. But if you are someone who is focused on body composition and losing fat, doing strictly cardiovascular activities only is not going to be optimal for improving your body composition over time. This is where anaerobic kind of takes over. So zones 4 and 5 primarily use our stored glucose and glycogen, as well as creatine phosphate. We'll get into that a little bit more in the next slides. And this is like very short bursts of energy. So think like strength training, jumping, etc. And this is really, really good for building muscle size, strength, and weight management. Because when we are training in our anaerobic zones, we are improving the volume of our muscles. And when we have a greater muscle volume density, we are more than likely going to be better at weight management, because that muscle is going to take more calories to operate. So that's going to increase your metabolism, and it's going to help you lose weight while you're just sitting here recording a slideshow. So think of aerobic is great for cardiovascular health. Anaerobic is great for optimizing strength, performance, and weight management. A couple of other notes is that you're, I think I've already said all this. I'm just reading my notes. Higher anaerobic threshold is greater for cardiovascular health. And then there really isn't one zone that's best for, this or that. We do want to focus on working in all 5 of our zones and utilizing them for different purposes. And I know that there's people out there that are like, I never do cardio. I don't want to lose my gains. You still need to do zone 1 through 3 exercise. You still need to keep your heart healthy. You still need to improve your blood pressure and your cardiovascular system. And the same is the other way for people who are like, I just do cardio and running. You want to make sure that you're doing some weightlifting and anaerobic training as well, so that you can improve some of those energy systems also. So this sheet right here goes into what I was just talking about. The higher your heart rate gets, the more anaerobic you're getting. And you can see right where the aerobic and anaerobic crosses at that anaerobic threshold. And that should be the point where your body switches. You can see the blue line is energy from fat, and the orange line is energy from carbs or creatine. So there, you're never purely in one zone or the other. You get pretty close. It's like within margins. So it's kind of safe to say that aerobic, zone 1 is you're just burning fat, and zone 5 is you're just burning carbs, but you're always producing a little bit of energy from all of them. And we really do want to train in all 5 of these systems. So keep in mind that I have color coded these. That's going to be helpful with keeping this information straight on the next slides, because right now we're just talking about anaerobic versus aerobic, and we are going to be getting into some more detailed energy systems here in just a second. All right, so now we are talking about energy systems. So that's why I told you, remember the color-coded people, because now it has flipped, because this is just the way that the charts are talked about, because now we're talking about total energy contribution instead of heart rate zone per se. So ATP, basically your phosphogenic system. This is your rapid burst of energy. And as you can see here, we start off at close to 100, and it drops at about the 60-second mark. We have very limited amounts of stored creatine phosphate in our body, and this is going to give us energy for something like a 1 to 3 rep max, explosive power, sprinting, anything that's going to take a very short amount of time, but a high amount of effort. You're primarily using your creatine phosphate. And this is a fun thing to think about. Think about sprinters versus marathon runners. Sprinters are buff. They have big muscles, even in their arms. Their legs are massive, and they have shredded abs that are like bulky abs. The reason why the sprinter has large muscles and the marathon runner doesn't primarily comes down to ATP and glycolysis, because the stored creatine phosphate and then the glycogen in the glycolysis, in the glycolytic system, the stored creatine and the stored carbs are living in your muscles. So those athletes that are bigger and bulkier and have larger muscles, like a sprinter, have more stored energy for explosive efforts. So if you are trying to increase your muscle size, and ladies, I just want to say, you're not going to turn into a beefcake. Like, you just don't have the testosterone for that. Improved muscle mass for most women is going to translate to weight management and keeping your body healthy as you age. Women, especially after they hit like the age of 30, they start losing muscle mass, their metabolism starts to slow down, and they start gaining extra fat. So it's important for us to train in our anaerobic phases. So the ATP and the glycolysis is going to be really, really helpful, because that's going to help you increase your muscle volume. And then especially as we think about like aging long term, strength is one of the last things we lose as we age, but power is one of the first things we lose. So improving your explosive power is a really great longevity tool, because it's going to help with fall prevention. It's going to help with your reactivity to things. And this doesn't even have to be in like a sports setting. This could simply be, you slip on the ice and then you're able to catch yourself because you can quickly react and get your foot out in front of yourself. But somebody who has a very poor storage of stored muscle glycogen and creatine phosphate is not going to be able to produce enough power to move that leg fast enough to prevent you from falling. So keep that in mind as to why some of these systems could be important for people. If you're like, well, I'm not a sprinter, I don't care about big muscles, it's still important for you to train these energy systems for everybody. So creatine phosphate starts off really high, drops off at about the 60-second mark. But the good thing is your glycolytic system, otherwise known as glycolysis, kind of picks up the slack. So that one starts right at 0, kind of starts to peak, and then it hangs in there for upwards of about 3 minutes. So this would be for someone who's doing sports that are like a little bit longer effort, but it's not as like explosive, like a 1 to 3 rep max. This could definitely be useful for people who are in like strongman or jujitsu, where you're doing 3 to 5 minute rounds of fighting, which is requiring high amounts of effort, or something like strongman, where it's like you have a 90-second medley or a 3-minute medley, or you're trying to carry a sandbag for as long as you can. You are absolutely glycolytic. So that's why strongman have such big, powerful muscles, is because we're training that glycolytic system a lot. And then you can see oxidative over here. It's just putting along. But after the 3-minute mark, it really takes over. The oxidative system provides very slow amounts of energy for, infinite time virtually. And that's why we really see with like MMA fighters, after kind of like about 3 minutes, the term is like they're gassed out. It's like, oh man, he's just gassed out. And if they use up all of their stored creatine, and if they used up all their stored glycogen, they start to move really slow. Do you ever see that at the end of the round? It's like they're punching each other in like slow motion. It's like, oh man, they must be so tired. And that's because there's no more creatine or glycogen to produce power behind the muscle. And they're relying on their oxidative system, which is really slow to produce the energy. So it's like they're fighting in slow motion and just barely tapping each other because there's no more force output coming from the muscle cells. So these are our 3 main energy systems. And it's backwards. So let's go into what some of these energy systems mean for you in your training. Okay, so this one is written out how I just had it last time with ATP, glycolysis, and then oxidative. So ATP, again, short bursts of intense energy, up to 60 seconds. So people who have a very poorly trained phosphogenic system, or they just don't have a lot of reserves, they might only get a couple seconds out of this. Like that's enough time to, like, if your glass of water goes to fall, you have enough energy to like reach your arm out fast and catch it. But I don't know about you, but I want 60 seconds of phosphogenic energy. And this is working at about 90 to 100% of max power for the force output. Work to rest ratios. This is important. So if you're doing anything like sprint work or like your rep training, you want to have like a 1-to-2 or 1-to-20 work to rest ratio. So if you're sprinting for 30 seconds, you better be resting for a minute or more. So it's 1-to-2 to 1-to-20 work to rest ratio. And again, like I said, these would be things like jujitsu, certain movements, powerlifting, absolutely, Olympic lifting, absolutely, shot put, sprinters. Glycolysis, on the other hand, 1 to 3 minutes of energy, about 30 to 90% of max power. These work to rest ratios change around a little bit. We are moving over to like 1-to-3 to 1-to-5 work to rest ratios. And examples include, like I said, like strongman, jujitsu. And then this is a really good system, like I said, for building size and strength, because again, we're putting the muscle under a lot of tension. Time under tension equals muscle growth and tendon health. I didn't mention that before, but time under tension is going to help keep your tendons healthy. So if you are someone who struggles from achy joints, slow, controlled eccentric reps are going to be amazing for you to improve your joint health. Lastly, the oxidative system can provide you energy all day long. I am relatively oxidative right now. I feel like I'm a little bit hyper. I had some coffee today, so I might be using some stored sugars. But this one is about 20 to 30% max power, really low, really easy. Work to rest ratio, kind of 1-to-1. And examples include long distance events, biking, running, swimming, paddleboarding, jogging, hiking, etc. And we are going to be wrapping up here in just a second. So this really summarizes zone training and energy system training. So just to recap, you have your zone 1, 2, 3 anaerobic threshold, zone 4 and 5. Zones 1 through 3 is your aerobic, zones 4 and 5 is your anaerobic. Let's all say, which zone's the most important? All of them. Good job, you guys win. You should be seeing some zone training in your workouts. I want you to pay attention to where your heart rate's at. If you don't know where your heart rate's at, I actually do recommend you get a heart rate monitor. Polair has the best heart rate monitoring technology. Garmin, I would say, is probably right behind them. Garmin's pretty good, but Polair does have the best technology. They're the gold standard in heart rate monitoring. Optimally, you have a strap, not a watch, because the strap is going to give you the most accurate information. The watch could be a little bit off. I'm a big fan of my Oura Ring. I wear this all the time. I think it's pretty good, but it still doesn't beat the strap. So if you're really serious about your heart rate training, I would invest in a Polair heart rate monitor with the strap. I do have some recommendations in the team feed about some things that you could add to your Christmas wish list or just your wish list in general, or just treat yourself. These are things that are going to sync with both Chronometer and Team Builder to help make your training in your life a little bit more easier. But that was it for my quick summary on these things. If you do have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to ask. You can ask me directly, text me, call me, DM me on Team Builder. You can chat with the group chat. Please talk to the group chat. I want this to be a fun online community where we all support each other and answer each other's questions. But that's all for this video. Thank you guys.